The old mansion on the edge of town had always been the subject of sinister rumors. Abandoned for decades, it loomed like a dark sentinel, its windows like empty eye sockets, its doors tightly shut as if to keep something unspeakable inside. No one dared to venture near it, especially at night, when strange sounds and flickering lights were sometimes seen from its upper floors. One stormy evening, a group of friends, Sarah, Mark, Emily, and Jason, decided to explore the mansion, driven by a mixture of boredom and curiosity. Armed with flashlights and a video camera, they pushed open the rusted iron gate that creaked loudly in protest. The air seemed to grow colder as they approached the massive wooden door, its surface carved with grotesque faces that seemed to writhe in the dim light. "Are we really doing this?" Emily asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Come on, it's just an old house," Mark replied, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Nothing's going to happen." With a grunt, Jason pushed the heavy door open, revealing a grand foyer layered in dust and cobwebs. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dull and tarnished. The air was thick with the scent of decay and neglect. Sarah shivered. "Let's just get this over with." They stepped inside, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. The mansion was eerily silent except for the distant rumble of thunder. They split up, each taking a different direction, hoping to cover more ground. Jason found himself in a long corridor lined with portraits. Each painting depicted a member of the family that had once lived there, their eyes following him as he moved. One portrait, in particular, caught his attention. A stern-looking man with piercing eyes and a sinister smirk. The nameplate read, Lucius Blackwood. "Guys, come check this out," he called out, but his voice seemed swallowed by the house. Meanwhile, Sarah and Emily wandered into the parlor, where an old piano stood covered in dust. Emily tentatively pressed a key, and a dissonant note rang out, startling them both. Suddenly, the piano began to play on its own, a haunting melody that sent chills down their spines. They backed away, their hearts pounding. "Let's find the others and get out of here," Sarah whispered, her face pale. Mark, in another part of the house, discovered a hidden door behind a large bookcase. Intrigued, he pushed it open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Against his better judgment, he descended, the steps creaking ominously beneath his weight. At the bottom, he found a heavy iron door, its surface covered in strange, arcane symbols. The door seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and Mark felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He knew he should turn back, but something compelled him to reach out and touch it. As his fingers brushed the cold metal, the door swung open with a deafening roar, revealing a swirling vortex of fire and shadow. Back upstairs, Jason rejoined Sarah and Emily, and they began searching for Mark. They followed his earlier calls until they reached the hidden door and descended the stairs. When they saw the open iron door, they froze, the surrounding air vibrating with a palpable malevolence. Mark stood at the threshold, his eyes wide with terror. I can't move," he gasped as if an invisible force was holding him in place. Without warning, a monstrous hand emerged from the vortex, its skin charred and cracked, fingers ending in razor-sharp claws. It grabbed Mark and began to pull him towards the swirling abyss. The others screamed and tried to pull him back, but the strength of the hand was overwhelming. Blood splattered the walls as Mark was torn apart, his agonized screams echoing through the house. The vortex seemed to feed on his life force, growing larger and more powerful. The iron door slammed shut, cutting off the horrific scene. But the damage was done. The mansion began to tremble, the very foundations groaning as if under immense strain. The friends, now covered in Mark's blood and barely holding onto their sanity, raced back upstairs. The house was coming alive around them, doors slamming, windows shattering, and the walls closing in. "We need to get out of here," Emily cried, tears streaming down her face. But as they reached the foyer, the front door slammed shut, trapping them inside. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the mansion, chilling them to the bone. "Welcome to my domain," it growled. "You cannot leave. You are mine." The friends huddled together, their terror palpable. They had unwittingly opened the door to hell itself, and there was no escape. The mansion's true nature was revealed, a gateway to unimaginable horrors, and they were now its prisoners. The story had just begun, and their nightmare was far from over. As the sinister voice faded into the oppressive silence of the mansion, Sarah, Emily, and Jason struggled to regain their composure. The walls seemed to close in, breathing with a life of their own. The mansion was no longer just an abandoned house. It had become a living, breathing entity of malevolence. "We need to find another way out," Jason said, trying to mask his fear with determination. They moved cautiously through the mansion, their flashlights flickering as if the batteries were being drained by the malevolent energy surrounding them. Each room they entered seemed more twisted and grotesque than the last, filled with grotesque statues, decaying furniture, and walls that bled. Suddenly, they heard a soft, haunting melody. It was the piano, once again playing by itself, but this time, the notes were distorted, creating a discordant and eerie tune. The sound drew them towards a grand ballroom, where the chandelier above swayed despite the stillness of the air. In the center of the room stood a figure. It was Mark, or what was left of him. His body was a grotesque, mangled mess, his eyes wide and filled with a terror that mirrored their own. He moved jerkily, as if controlled by invisible strings. "Help me," he croaked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Emily screamed, backing away in horror. Jason and Sarah grabbed her, pulling her towards the nearest exit. But the doors slammed shut, trapping them inside the ballroom with the abomination that had once been their friend. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance around them. Mark's body convulsed, and with a sickening crack, his limbs twisted into unnatural angles. From his mouth, a black, viscous substance began to pour, forming a pool around his feet. "Stay back," Jason shouted, but his voice wavered. The black substance started to bubble and hiss, emitting a foul stench. It began to take shape, forming grotesque figures with elongated limbs and hollow, eyeless faces. The creatures crawled towards them, their movements jerky and unnatural. "Run!" Sarah screamed, and they bolted towards the only remaining exit, a door on the far side of the room. They burst through the door, slamming it shut behind them. The hallway beyond was dark and narrow, lined with portraits that seemed to watch their every move. Their footsteps echoed loudly, mingling with the distant, haunting melody that still played from the ballroom. "We need to find the source of this evil and destroy it," Jason said, his face set with grim determination. "It's the only way we'll get out of here alive." They continued down the hallway, their flashlights flickering in the oppressive darkness. They reached a staircase leading down to the basement, a place none of them wanted to go, but they had no other choice. The air grew colder as they descended, their breath visible in the dim light. The basement was a labyrinth of stone corridors and dank, musty rooms. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the walls were covered in strange, pulsating growths. The sense of dread intensified with every step they took. In the deepest part of the basement, they found a large, ornate door covered in the same arcane symbols as the iron door upstairs. The surrounding air crackled with energy, and a low, sinister hum emanated from beyond. "This has to be it," Sarah whispered, "the source of all this evil." With a deep breath, Jason pushed the door open. The room beyond was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a vast chamber, its walls lined with shelves filled with ancient, dusty tomes. In the center of the room stood an altar, upon which lay a large, leather-bound book. The book seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, its cover adorned with a demonic face that seemed to leer at them. As they approached, the air grew colder, and the surrounding shadows deepened. "This is it," Jason said. "The Book of the Damned. It must be destroyed." But as they reached for the book, the demonic face on its cover twisted into a grotesque smile. The room began to shake, and the surrounding shadows coalesced into a towering figure with burning red eyes. "You dare to challenge me?" the figure roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the mansion. "You will suffer for your insolence." The friends stood their ground, knowing that their only hope of escape lay in destroying the book. As the demonic figure lunged towards them, they braced themselves for the final battle, their fate hanging in the balance. The nightmare was far from over, and the true horror of the mansion had yet to be revealed. The demonic figure loomed over them, its fiery eyes burning with malevolent intent. The air crackled with dark energy, and the oppressive weight of the mansion seemed to press down on them from all sides. Jason, Sarah, and Emily knew that their only hope of survival lay in destroying the Book of the Damned. "Get ready," Jason shouted, gripping a piece of broken wood like a makeshift weapon. "We have to do this together." The demon lunged at them, its claws slashing through the air. Jason dodged to the side, barely avoiding a fatal blow. Emily, trembling with fear but driven by a newfound determination, grabbed a heavy candelabra from a nearby table and swung it at the creature, hitting it square in the chest. The demon roared in pain, momentarily staggered. "Now, Sarah," Jason yelled. Sarah raced towards the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached for the Book of the Damned, but as her fingers brushed the cover, a searing pain shot through her hand. She cried out but didn't pull back. Instead, she summoned all her courage and yanked the book off the altar. The demonic figure howled with rage, its eyes blazing brighter. It lunged at Sarah, but Jason and Emily tackled it, wrestling it to the ground. The room shook violently, the very walls seeming to scream in agony. "Destroy it, Sarah," Jason shouted, struggling to hold the demon down. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the book. The pages were filled with dark, arcane symbols that seemed to writhe and twist before her eyes. She tore at the pages, ripping them out one by one, as the demon shrieked and convulsed. A blinding light erupted from the book, flooding the chamber with a searing brightness. The demonic figure writhed in agony, its form dissolving into smoke and shadow. The mansion itself seemed to tremble, the dark energy dissipating as the book's power was undone. Suddenly, the ground beneath them cracked open, and the book fell into the abyss, vanishing into the darkness below. The light intensified, and with a deafening roar, the demon was pulled into the void, its screams echoing into silence. The light faded, and the mansion fell still. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the air felt lighter, almost breathable. Jason, Sarah, and Emily lay on the ground, exhausted and covered in sweat and dust. "It's over," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We did it." Jason helped Sarah to her feet, and they all looked around the now silent chamber. The evil presence that had permeated the mansion was gone, and the house felt like just an old, decaying building once more. "Let's get out of here," Jason said, his voice hoarse but relieved. They made their way back through the mansion, their steps echoing in the empty halls. The front door, which had previously been sealed shut, now stood open, allowing the first rays of dawn to filter in. They stumbled outside, breathing in the fresh morning air. As they walked away from the mansion, they could see it begin to crumble, as if the destruction of the book had undone whatever dark magic had held it together. The once ominous structure collapsed in on itself, reduced to a pile of rubble and dust. The friends stood in silence, watching the ruins of the mansion. The ordeal had changed them, binding them together in a way that only shared trauma can. They had faced the darkest horrors and emerged victorious, but they knew they would never be the same. "Let's go home," Sarah said softly, and they turned away from the ruins, walking towards the sunrise and the promise of a new beginning. The door to hell was closed, and the nightmare was finally over. But the memory of that night would haunt them forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of reality, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to seek it out.